We think of exercise as being really good for your heart and really good for your muscles, but it's also really, really important for your brain.
Andrew James Thomas Stevenson, Associate Professor at Aalborg University.
There's a lot of research that shows that exercise can really help boost memory and it can help boost retention of motor skills, and that's at any age. It doesn't really matter what you do, whether that's, floorball or cycling or running or circuit training, strength training, as long as the intensity is high enough and you're able to push yourself, then it can benefit your brain.
What does the literature say about the use of motor imagery in sports?
Maybe you're referring to a little bit like the idea or the concept of self-talk. When you're kind of talking about talking to yourself, we all have these kind of inner voices that are talking to us relatively constantly. Whereas I guess motor imagery is more like a kind of a deliberate practice type technique where you're really trying to engage the system, especially the motor and the sensory systems that are involved in executing skill or part of a game. There is a lot of evidence that shows that we do actually activate the sensory motor systems within our nervous system. A lot of studies have shown that the area of the brain that activates a specific muscle can actually increase with training, whether that's physical motor training or whether that's actually mental rehearsal of a physical skill. Michael Phelps, Olympian swimmer, he used it all the time, every day in training. It was part of his routine before races. Any race that he did, he would visualize the race. There's classic stories of someone like him, losing his goggles in the water, but because, he'd trained so much physically and mentally, he could just push through. He knew exactly how many strokes he needed to get to the finish line, still won a gold medal when that happened.
Bonded by Science, proudly presented by Noble Blocks.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you so much for joining us on Bonded by Science. I'm looking forward to hearing about your background, your research, and your future outlook on where research is heading for your particular field.
Cool. Thanks for having me, Shelley.
Great. So could you do us a very nice favor and give us a brief introduction to how you got into academic research? What was your pathway? Hi, Andrew. Thank you so much for joining us on Bonded by Science. I'm looking forward to hearing about your background, your research, and your future outlook on where research is heading for your particular field.
Cool. Thanks for having me, Shelley.
Great. So could you do us a very nice favor and give us a brief introduction to how you got into academic research? What was your pathway into science and becoming a professor?
Yeah, so my background is that I grew up in New Zealand, and then when I was kind of ending high school, I went on a high school exchange to Denmark, which is now where I live. So yeah, lots of paths kind of led me back here. But when I came back, I started studying, and my bachelor's degree is in sports science and psychology. Because I was quite interested in, the psychology of elite performance and things like that. And as I kind of progressed through that education, I was really lucky that I got to spend some time in a research laboratory in Auckland. And they do a lot of research with how the brain kind of controls movement, what happens in patients when the movement system is kind of broken or damaged, and how can these different techniques that we're using maybe help those kind of patients. And so that experience was like my first really kind of research experience. I got to use a technique called transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is a brain stimulation technique. And I got hands-on experience with actually stimulating human brains, and I thought that was pretty awesome. From there I ended up living in Canada for a couple of years, where I did my master's through a contact. Thumbs up from Shelley. Through contact through the supervisors and advisors I had in Auckland, and then from there moved to Denmark, and kind of really pursued this movement neuroscience field. I've been really lucky to work with some pretty awesome people within that, and as you know, the kind of the mentors you have and things can really shape your interest and shape you, and that's why I really wanted to kind of pursue that. I really like the idea of the research that you do can eventually help people yeah, either patients or yeah, other groups. So
Great. And do you like when you first got into sports science and psychology? Were you playing sports at the time? Like, would you consider yourself at any time an athlete or at least an enthusiast?
certainly enthusiast. I played football, soccer, a lot when I was growing up, and yeah, I was a goalkeeper, and I think because of that, I was quite interested in maybe the psychology of things because yeah, I don't know. I think when you kind of progress through the youth ranks, and I know that football in New Zealand is not quite as big as what it is in Europe and other parts of the world, but yeah, like I really enjoyed kind of the psychology of performance and especially being a goalkeeper. Like, if you make one mistake, then you could cost the team a game, but you could and otherwise you could do everything else in the game perfectly. So I think I was quite interested in that aspect of.
Yeah, it's definitely something super heavy to have on your shoulders like the whole game. I'm guessing those that haven't been a goalkeeper don't really realize the pressure that mounts. I suppose, especially during like a tie game match or as the clock clicks down.
Yeah, but at the other end of the spectrum, you really have a chance to be a hero, right? Like, I mean, if you make a great save, then you get a lot of credit. You
That's
obviously
true.
don't get a chance to win the game by scoring goals very often, but
But
yeah,
saving them, yes.
that's what really fired me up when I was playing.
Do you think it draws a certain type of personality because it's like a high risk, high reward scenario
Yeah,
within
yeah,
sports, like being a goalkeeper?
I think so. I think they always talk about goalkeepers in many different sports, whether it's ice hockey or football or handball, that they're kind of the crazy ones. I think I was just someone that didn't really enjoy running a long way after a ball. so, so I was also probably one of the tallest in the team back then. So stick the tall guy in goal, and hopefully he can actually reach up to the top of the goal
Yeah.
and be able to stop the ball. So I think that's for me where it started. But a lot of coaches would kind of say like your personality on the field and your personality off the field can be quite different and maybe should be in
Oh,
terms
really?
of yeah, it was quite an interesting observation, like in terms of I guess like your aggression levels and your you can be as nice as you like on the field, but you shouldn't be nice to your opponents or whatever. Like there's often a lot of dirty tactics and stuff in more higher level football with people trying to stomp on your toes and all that kind of stuff. So you should at least be able to stick up for yourself. But yeah, the goalkeepers are often known as being the crazy ones on the
Hmm.
team because they're willing to throw their whole body in the way of oncoming
Yes.
players and traffic and feet and people trying to kick you in the ball. Yeah, so you have to have I guess a little bit of craziness to go into that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I never really like thought too much about it, to be honest. I think I just as you mentioned, like you see them as heroes when they make these fantastic saves, right? So I didn't think about the crazy part, like that they are on the spectrum of crazy.
At least if you look at like social media and stuff now, then it's often the videos that will get lots of views are the ones where goalkeepers make these horrendous mistakes. And I certainly had a few of those when I was growing up, and those are the ones that you got to just brush off and focus, because if you focus on that for the rest of the game, you could just keep making more.
I know that you do a lot of teaching in sports science, and in that teaching you supervise a lot of groups. Have some of the groups that you've worked with, like, do any come to mind that have looked at some of the interplay between psychology and elite performance that you think, wow, like I really remember this group? Because you have like many groups every year that come in, and you've been teaching for several years. What's the first one that pops into mind?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess a lot of the groups that I've had, like because my kind of further academic education has not so much been in psychology, has not as much touched on that. But I mean, I have had a few groups that have looked at like how, for example, motor imagery and kind of mental techniques can try and improve performance or improve motor learning. yeah, some of the the early groups I had, they were interested in, like, can that help you to be better on like a unicycle or juggling or something like that. So it's often when you're a supervisor for projects on lower semesters, you really want to kind of encourage their interests and make the project kind of their own, that they're contributing with their ideas, and I think that's a really fun thing to kind of explore that.
So what is the difference between, for example, motor imagery and um like 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 there's motor imagery, and then there's like things that you say to yourself as an athlete, and they're very different. So I think that distinction would be really nice to hear you put some words on. And then also, like, what does the literature say about the use of motor imagery in sports, and then also in elite performance?
Yeah. Well, I think, I guess maybe you're referring to a little bit like the idea or the concept of self-talk, when you're kind of talking about like talking to yourself. And um, I mean, and we all have these kind of inner voices that are talking to us relatively constantly about, that's our inner dialogue and our inner thoughts. Whereas I guess motor imagery is more like a kind of a deliberate practice type technique, where you're really trying to engage the system that, like, especially the motor and the sensory systems that are involved in executing a skill or executing part of a game, or yeah. And there is a lot of evidence that shows that we do actually activate the sensory motor systems within our nervous system. I mentioned the technique transcranial magnetic stimulation earlier, and if you actually, I mean, the way that works is that if you hold a coil above the head, that it can induce a magnetic field through the coil, then you can actually stimulate different areas of the brain and activate the neurons within the brain. And if you do that on the part of the brain that controls the rest of the body, or the muscles of the body, you can actually activate different parts of the body. So you can make the hand twitch, or you can make the foot twitch, or even your cheek, or different muscles of the body. And a lot of studies have shown that, for example, the area that activates the brain, or the area of the brain that activates a specific muscle, can actually increase with training, whether that's physical motor training, or whether that's actually mental rehearsal of a physical skill, which I think is pretty cool. But even if you're just sitting there at rest and you can see a little twitch in the muscle, you get a twitch that's so big. But if you just imagine activating that muscle, you get a twitch that's much bigger, even though you're activating the brain with the same input. So there's a lot of really good evidence that these sensory motor pathways are being activated, even though you're not actually activating your body physically.
Right. So motor imagery is like when you engage like how something, like how you would execute something, like I do this, I do this, I do this, and then as you do those things, you also imagine how it feels at the same time. So,
Yeah.
and when those things run in parallel, so like the body is still, but when those things are running in parallel, you actually train the areas of the brain that you would normally train, or at least engage, when you physically perform that skill. And what are the benefits then of like doing that? And in what situations do you think that motor imagery is particularly helpful, for individuals or even athletes?
Yeah, I mean, especially athletes, I think it's a really really useful tool, and you see someone like Michael Phelps, champion Olympian swimmer. He used it all the time, every day in training. It was part of his routine before races. Any race that he did, he would visualize the race. There's classic stories of someone like him, like losing his goggles in the water, but because he'd trained so much physically and mentally, like he could just push through. He knew exactly how many strokes he needed to get to the finish line. Still won a gold medal when that happened. So in terms of like having, he actually had like a mental plan for, okay, if I lose my goggles at this phase of the race, because he had mentally rehearsed it, then he could execute on it.
Right. Yeah. And what about in rehab? Because I know motor imagery has been like a go-to technique for rehabilitation. It could be like rehabilitation in sport, but also rehabilitation from other types of trauma or accidents.
Yeah, absolutely. We use it a lot in our research, actually. For example, patients who have had a stroke, which is either a bleed or a blockage of blood flow in the brain, which leads to damage of the neural tissue. Some of these patients either can move their arm a little bit after a stroke, or they have absolutely no use of their arm. But they still have the ability to imagine and try and plan and execute a movement of their arm. So we can actually record the brain activity using specialized electrodes that we can set on the put on the head of the patient, and we can actually record the same signals that we would see as if you were actually executing the movement, and we can use that in applications for example, brain-computer interface technology. So actually reading the brain waves and allowing those brain signals to communicate with an external device. And what we do with that is we try and basically induce some kind of plasticity or changes in the nervous system to benefit recovery after a stroke.
Yeah, and plasticity is like a common word that like a neuroscientist would use, and I think a lot of people have a pretty good understanding that keep learning, keep training. It's good for you. It's good for your brain. It keeps you sharp. But what is like the neural basis of neuroplasticity? Like, what does it actually mean when you refer to it here?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what we knew, even 30, 40 years ago, we didn't know so much about how the brain and the nervous system could change. We kind of used to think that, once we become adults and are fully grown, then all of the brain connections are pretty hardwired and they don't really change. But we know that that's definitely not the case now. Like it's kind of the neural basis of how we learn and how we how we learn new motor skills, how we learn new facts, how we basically respond to the external environment and changes within that. So there's a lot of research that's been done on animal models that show that we can you know develop new connections within the brain called synapses. We can strengthen the synapses that we already have, and we can even lose synapses in some cases, and that can be all of these things can be good and bad. So we can have sometimes maladaptive plasticity, which is what could potentially be mechanisms behind going from acute pain to chronic pain. But we also have beneficial plasticity, which is involved in learning, and those are the things that we want to try and exploit with rehabilitation. Because if you're having to relearn the use of your arm or relearn walking after damage to the nervous system, then those are the things that we want to try and exploit.
I think neuroplasticity is like a super fascinating topic because it is a red thread between so many, topics of interest, whether you're interested in, growing old gracefully, like it has a huge role in longevity research. It has a huge role in understanding like the progress of certain diseases, especially cognitive, diseases that are affecting the brain and how we move. And then of course it's super relevant for like sports and athletes that want to continue to be competitive as they become older. I know a lot of like for me personally, I still play. I'm pretty active, or I try to be. And I still learn a lot of new stuff. Like when I'm playing sports, I mean, I like to learn new moves. I love playing basketball. And actually, I've taken up curling recently. So I'm bringing some Canadian-ness into Denmark. But it's funny because I actually learned how to play curling in Denmark. So you can actually take in new skills. And I think this is a very positive effect on the brain because you're encouraging growth, you're encouraging you're using your brain. And I think it's true when you see some of those analogies that your brain is like a muscle. And if you
Oh
don't
yeah, yeah.
use it, then it'll just like you may have the original like number of neurons, but the volume, like the number of connections, and just the efficiency of those pathways, which help you take, faster decisions or help you automate movements. I mean, those become so much more fine tuned in the brain. So keep learning, keep training,
Yeah, well, and research shows that we can learn things at any age, right? Like, I mean,
any age.
obviously
Yeah.
it takes a little bit longer if you're learning a new language when you're an adult compared to when you're a kid, but
Yes.
and that's because these processes they just happen so much faster in the growing nervous system, but we still can, and whether that's motor skills, whether that's language skills, whether that's I mean, what you train is what you get better at,
Yeah.
um, and we can all do it at any age. I think that's really important.
Yeah. I think people underestimate like how much capacity they really have, and that they really shouldn't look at their age as a number. They should just look at like what they're interested in, how they feel, and just keep moving with that and just ignore the age. Um, but don't ignore how you feel. Like, you if people have natural limits. So
Yeah, well, and we've seen a lot of research recently that shows the benefits of movement to neuroplasticity. There's a lot of research that shows that exercise can really help boost memory, and it can help boost retention of motor skills and things like that. So I mean, and that's at any age.
are you referring to cardiovascular like exercise, like running, like that type of exercise for like a boosted memory function?
Yeah, I mean, even strength training is also good for memory formation. And this a study from the University of Copenhagen that looked at like different types of training. And as long as you've got an intensity that's kind of the higher intensity, the better. Obviously, you should listen to your body, but it doesn't really matter what you do, whether that's floorball or cycling or running or uh, you know circuit training, strength
Yeah.
training. Like as long as the intensity is high enough and you're able to push yourself, then it can benefit your brain. I think that's really important. I mean, yeah, we think of exercise as being really good for your heart and really good for your muscles, but it's also really, really important for your brain.
Yeah, just to move more, because yeah, we have just adopted such a sedentary lifestyle. Like, it's too bad that we couldn't, have this as a walk and talk. So
That's true. That's
yeah,
true.
that we
Next
have to
time.
try that next time and see
So
how
that would be
successful we
an
are.
interesting podcasting concept. I guess not so easy with the technology that you need to record, but
No, but there's always, I think
where
there's
there's a will, there's a
solutions
way.
out there. Yeah, we'll find one. We'll find one. So I would like to ask you a few questions about some of your latest studies that you've put out. There is some, like, you do some research that uses a device called a perturbator. So this perturbation unit. And for those that are listening, I was wondering if you could give a brief description of how that might look.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of research in our lab, trying to understand the mechanisms behind walking, and how the different parts of the nervous system are working together. And so we have lots of different fun tools in our lab to try and investigate these things. And one of them is this brain stimulation device. We also have a special treadmill in our lab that has two separate belts. So it's called a split belt treadmill. So left leg walks on the left belt, right leg walks on the right belt, and we can independently control the speeds or directions of those belts. So all of a sudden, we could make one leg go a little bit faster than the other, so you're kind of limping. We could even make one belt all of a sudden go backwards, so we could cause a perturbation where you're basically kind of stepping on a banana peel and you're falling backwards. We could make one of them go a lot faster, so it kind of is a simulation of like tripping because you're kind of falling forwards. Yeah, and in our labs here at the university, we also have other devices that can, for example, be attached to the knee or the ankle joint, and all of a sudden rotate the joint, so causing you
Ooh,
to kind of trip up,
yes.
or change at least the kind of the sensory inflow of information from the joints. Like if the joint position changes, then you're going to change what the joint and the muscles are going to tell the nervous system. And most recently, we've been developing a staircase, where one of the steps can actually drop or lift up as soon as you step on it.
Hmm.
Again, to look at the compensatory mechanisms behind that, whether we're really using the sensory information that we have in our body as like a feedback mechanism to compensate, or like a feed forward mechanism to kind of plan our actions, or a combination of both. So
Right. So
yeah.
just to put some extra words on that. So like as we go up the stairs and sometimes like a step is the wrong size or like it's literally like it's just missing. Like so if you think about some old stair steps, if you're sightseeing, which is often the last place that you want to fall is on a holiday.
Yeah.
So you're going up some steps and sometimes there's a stair that misses. And your question is how do we not fall? Like is it because we already have something pre-programmed that we shoot out some sort of motor command, or are we actually responding to the new sensory input and then putting out that motor program? So would that be a fair assessment of the situation?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a reason that standard stairs and houses and buildings are standardized sizes and standardized lengths and things like that, right? Because
What is the standard size? Do you
I
know?
no, I can't remember off the top of my head.
We'll drop it
My
in.
Yeah, right.
This is the standard
Yeah,
size. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
But it's so
Builders will know
true.
that off the top of their head, but
Oh, that's right. The
yeah,
next time I meet someone, I'm gonna like, what's the standard size of a stair? And then I'll see if they can answer that. But that would be some really good trivia to bring to a game.
for sure. I should look it up. I should know it.
Yeah, we should look that
But
up.
yeah, we have this platform in our lab that can all of a sudden drop as soon as some weight gets put on it, or we can delay the drop so that the drop happens a little bit longer in the stance phase, so that you're trying to really not expecting it.
Hmm.
And we've kind of seen during normal overground walking that if you do that, you basically are removing some of the sensory inflow from really important receptors in the muscles, and through that you can look at how the muscle is reacting, and whether these reactions are happening with the input of the brain or whether they're going through spinal circuits. So it's really an attempt to try and understand what's going on. And stair walking is probably a little bit more cognitively demanding. We have to be a little bit more sure about the placement of our feet, and we need to be the consequences of falling on a stairs is potentially more than just falling on a level floor.
Ah, okay. Yes.
So we do think that the brain is a little bit more cognitively aware, but we need to do some studies to try and investigate those things.
And that would really heavily rely on your visual, like the visual information. And how do you account for that in this perturbation setup? Because I'm thinking as I go up the stairs, I'm scanning the area as I go up. This happens so automatic that most people, like, we never think about it,
No,
right?
absolutely, yeah.
Until it becomes a challenge, like getting up the stairs. Like people think about this when they have a sprained ankle, like, oh crap, like there's some stairs. and then you realize. But so as you go up the stairs, you're scanning the situation, and you believe that scan is playing like a much larger role. So how do you then account for that in with this perturbation setup? Because now I'm just hearing like, well, I'm gonna make the stair drop, or I'm gonna put out like a some sort of like fake banana peel for you to fall on. So how do you account for the visual part?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and there's study. The visual part, we it's such a huge part of our balance and dynamic balance and stability. There are studies that show that, like, as you're approaching a staircase or maybe an incline or a decline, like a change in the environment, you actually change your gait pattern up to like 6 steps before, because you have to kind of prepare your gait in a smooth and efficient way to not lose too much speed, but you also have to make sure you hit the right target and make sure that you know your your foot is hitting the first step, especially in the right way. I mean, what we do is we try and basically just give them a target to look at, and we can measure the head angle and position with accelerometers, and we can also use that to see, like, how fast is the body dropping once we do these kind of perturbations and things like that. When we're on the treadmill, then we have a video playing in front of them at eye level, so we really try and not have the the people we have in the lab looking down at their feet and things like that. And so, we give them a lot of trials to start with. If it's the very first time they're walking up the stairs, then, they need a bit of practice to kind of figure out, okay, where should they start to have like a smooth transition to the staircase. And they need a few times to do that so that they can actually keep looking up.
Another application of like the perturbation research that you're doing is to explore better ways to help people like essentially not fall. So you've published a few studies on some of these research questions, and I'm wondering, like, I think there was one that you published quite recently, and then could you shed some light on your most recent publication in that area? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so we had a really excellent PhD student that was doing some research in a lab looking at these perturbation based balance training with the treadmill. And the idea behind that study was that basically if you trained someone, and these were elderly individuals, to fall in the lab, then the hypothesis was that if they could do that effectively, then we would maybe decrease the amount of falls or the risk of falling in everyday life, kind of like a vaccine against falling.
A vaccine against falling.
That
Yeah.
was kind of the tagline.
Because it can be quite deadly to fall, right?
Yeah.
As you get older.
Yeah, I mean, as you get older, you have, more balance issues. You have a decrease in strength. You have maybe a more unstable walking pattern. You can be more prone to tripping over carpets and things like that. But also, bone density decreases. More elderly people are, they have conditions like osteoporosis. So therefore, the consequences of falling when you're older are a lot more severe than younger. So hip fractures and things like that are a big danger, and that means a longer period of time where you have to be potentially in hospital or not able to move around, which then can cause further complications. So,
Such as?
I mean, cardiovascular issues if you're not able to move around as much, right? So if you're having a decrease in activity level for a prolonged period of time because you've had a hip fracture, then that can compound that issue.
Yeah, and it's true, right? So it's not only that it's expensive to help someone recover after a fall, especially as you're older, but it also increases the likelihood of death, right? That is the take home.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's not that you don't die because your hip is broken. You die because of the secondary effects that can occur because you're in a rest position for such a long time.
Right. So the cost for the individual can be high, but also the cost for society of helping these patients recover and recuperate and taking care of them basically. So it does cost a lot of money.
So what did your PhD student then like further investigate?
So what he did was he had a group of elderly individuals walking on the treadmill in the lab, and we did 3 different sessions where we did one session where we did this kind of banana skin type perturbation where the treadmill will all of a sudden start going in the opposite direction. So we trained falling backwards, and we did that on every, I can't remember exactly the number, maybe every 10th step or something like that, so that it was unpredictable when this would occur. And we could really see a lot of changes really quickly in the lab. So I think we did about 20 to 30 perturbations. And from the first perturbation, like a lot of them would actually fall. So they're obviously in a harness in the lab because we don't want to, actually have them falling in the lab and hurting themselves. So it was a safe environment for them to fall in. And then get to the last perturbation in the session, and they would be able to catch themselves and kind of prevent themselves from losing balance, which is pretty cool. And then we did another session where they would kind of have this really fast acceleration of the treadmill, so they would kind of fall forwards. They were better at catching themselves in that case. It didn't seem like as large of a perturbation. But yeah, we could still see that the recovery from those perturbations was better afterwards. And then we did one session where we mixed the two. So we really tried to make it completely random, whether it was the left foot, right foot, a slip perturbation or a trip perturbation, just to really kind of hone their training, I guess. And then we gave them a booster session after 6 months.
A booster session.
Like a booster shot, like really like a vaccine.
Literally just like the booster. Yeah. So they first experienced like I step up. Like, so you did, one direction, then the other direction, and then you mix the two.
Yeah.
And I guess that's almost like walking on, Mars when volcanoes are erupting and blah blah blah. So it's like really shaky ground. So you're preparing them for like a post-apocalyptic world. No, I'm just kidding. So like so they really got an experience, and then you bring them in 6 months later to reassess them also, right? And then during that reassessment, I guess they get the boost because they're essentially being trained again during the reassessment. How did you see, like, were the results good in sense of like, did they retain some of that the initial training? Because 6 months is a long time to like not train at something.
Yeah. So they were still really good when they came back the next time and we did the first perturbations. Like they were way better than when we very first started doing these perturbations. So there was certainly a learning effect of that. And we had a group of control patients, and so their intervention was basically just walking on the treadmill for 20 minutes, which is how long the training took.
And they never fell in the...
So they fell once, like in each direction, just to kind of,
I think that's important.
Yeah, before and after walking on a treadmill. So they didn't have like training, and they improve a little bit because obviously any kind of exposure during a test is also, I guess, just a little bit of training. So they did improve a little bit, but nowhere near to the degree as the intervention group. And then then we asked the older adults to basically send us fall diaries. So every month they had to answer a questionnaire about whether they had fallen and what the consequences of the falls were, because we were also quite interested in following up, like, what was...
How often do they fall?
Yeah, I mean, what it turns out in the study is that we had a fairly well-functioning group of individuals, and I think that's probably some kind of selection bias, right? Like you're not necessarily going to go into a study like this and want to participate voluntarily if you potentially are already, in a weaker situation. So the target group here could potentially be improved. But yeah, I think we had 70 in each group, and I think over the year we had, roughly, it was around one per person over the course of a year. Not because everyone fell.
Okay, but on average. Okay. So that's actually still quite a bit, right? So if you tracked about 70 people and you'd say, like, I don't know what the actual percentage of persons that fell, but if you said like a majority of them fell, some of them fell once, some of them fell twice, over a course of a year, that's actually more common than I expected you to say. Because how old were their participants?
Above 65.
Above 65. Okay.
So what we ended up seeing is that across the course of a year, we saw a 22% reduction in falls of the intervention group, which was great, but it was not significant. So it was not above the levels of chance.
I'm sure it was significant to the ones that didn't fall. Like, I think sometimes that's where you feel a little bit cheated by statistics, especially because, like, even though you had some decent fall numbers, it's not like you're wishing people to fall, but it's very hard to run studies like these when what you're trying to prevent doesn't happen that often, or happens once in like 5 years. So you need a huge number of participants, and you need like a massive follow-up.
Yeah, and it was a big study. Jens,
It is a big study.
PhD student, he had 70 in each group come through the lab, which is 70 times at least four visits that they're coming in, right? And following 140 fall diaries for a year, it's a huge study. But unfortunately was underpowered in terms of what we hope to find. Some studies in the literature had found up to 50% reduction in falls, which is really, really impressive.
That's impressive. Which goes towards what we were saying earlier about like keep training, keep moving, keep exercising.
Yeah, and train specifically for what you're wanting to do, right? Like if you want to get better at
Or what you want to prevent.
also that,
Yeah,
yeah.
I remember having like an event that was arranged with the sports science group when I was back at the university, and we were playing hockey. I don't know if
I was there too.
were
Yeah,
you there?
yeah.
Okay,
I remember
yes.
the pictures at least.
I remember the pictures there. I love those pictures. That was such a great day, and I hadn't really played. Like I've been on skates before, and as a Canadian, I'm supposed to be good at skating and all that kind of winter stuff. But I'm actually not a very good. I'm not. I'm quite poor at skating.
You were doing a lot better than I was, that's for sure.
Okay, but you're from New
I think I
Zealand,
couldn't
so.
even. I know. I don't even think I tried to be a goalkeeper in that, and that was mostly
Oh, you
because I was
were.
afraid that
Were you the goalkeeper?
I was, yeah.
That's
And
hilarious.
that was mostly because I didn't think that I could skate more than
You're
10 meters
still
without falling
crazy.
over. At least you get a lot of padding in ice hockey.
Yeah, that was the point. That was what I was about to bring up because once I realized it didn't hurt to fall, I was diving at everything. Like, because I didn't really, like, I was like, okay, I'm going to go for this. I'm going to go for the puck. And if I just completely miss it because I zoom by it, then it doesn't matter because I'll fall and I won't hurt myself.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
if you take that same type of thinking, is that somehow is that also something that could come up in this research study? Like, I know that you've done everything to like shield it and make it the best study possible, but I'm thinking if I've got this harness on and once I realize it it's not so bad to fall, then I'll be like, yeah, let's go. So
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in terms of like actually having this as a task that you're trying to learn, right? Learning happens when you explore. There are lots of theories that look at, you know, learning by play and learning by exploration and trial and error learning and things like that. And I think that, I we've also done studies where we we have subjects do what we call hybrid walking. So one leg is moving normally, and the other leg is on a belt that's going backwards. So it's walking backwards.
whoa, that feels very awkward.
It's a very, very strange thing, yeah. But what I noticed, and I don't know if it's true. I don't know. I haven't looked at the empirical evidence of this, but when you're in a harness, you're not in danger of falling over, so you can really explore a little more about challenging your balance and maybe go to more extremes than what you would try if you didn't have a harness on, right? So we can see people learn this walking pattern pretty quickly when they're in a harness, and I would bet that it would take a lot longer if they were not.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Because it's a bit scary, like having to shift your full weight onto a belt that's going in the opposite direction.
And you've tried it, right? Clearly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you were in the harness first, so I don't know if you have any videos you can share with us of you walking funny.
That's a good question. I have to
That
see
would
if
be
I
really
can
good.
find. Yeah, that
That
was
would be really good.
Saba that was doing that during her
Okay.
PhD, so I was a subject for her. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
But
I
yeah,
think
it's
that.
it's a fun demo just to really show like how quickly you can adapt to different situations.
Yeah, but I like the point that you made about exploring because I think that's about like exploring your limits. And in some of the sport, well, I remember when I was learning how to play volleyball, and also I played a lot of ultimate when I was in university, and like learning how to fall for volleyball, that was a big thing. And then learning how to dive, like to what we call it a layout in ultimate, that was also a type of fall. So you have to know how to like hit the ground
100%. Yeah.
and not be afraid. And maybe that's what we're missing as we get older. Like we really don't push our natural limits anymore. We don't walk on the edge,
Yeah,
right?
potentially. Yeah. Yeah. But I completely agree. I mean, this knowledge of how to fall, I think, is really valuable. Actually, that's I agree. When I was learning be a goalkeeper and falling in the right way so that you don't hurt yourself. Because obviously you're diving all over the place, and if you hurt yourself every time, it's no good to you know for continuing playing or enjoying the sport. But when I would mess around and play with other sports and things, I would volleyball, beach volleyball, or whatever. Like I would kind of use the techniques that I had in that, and try actually, to throw yourself around and catch a ball or hit the ball or.
Yeah, learn how to fall. It's like it's the new skill, right?
But yeah, I mean, when you get older and things like that, like, I think if you can take some of that away, and then, if you do actually trip or fall or whatever, then, we live in Denmark, and that's, it can be a bit icy in the winter and stuff. And, if you can actually.
Yeah, because we have that perfect, like it never gets cold enough, and then there's lots of rain. So you get black ice, a lot of black ice in Denmark. So you don't see it. And that's where it gets even more dangerous because you're completely unprepared. As we talked about earlier, like when you're going up the stairs, you have some cognitive engagement that you are actually on a stair, but when you have black ice, for example, you just don't see it, and so you haven't even potentially engaged those defense mechanisms to brace yourself. So cool. So what's on the horizon then for you in terms of like where you would like to see some of your research go? Uh,
Yeah, I mean the research that we did with the perturbation training was done in collaboration with the geriatric department at the hospital, and they are running a lot of really interesting studies about fall prevention, and that's really their something that's really important for them is not just having patients that are coming in and needing treatment, but how can you prevent them from coming in the first place?
right.
So I think they have a lot of ideas about potentially combining this kind of training with other forms of training that have also shown to help elderly and prevent falls, and that can be some strength training and things like that. Maybe even dance training. We have a few colleagues that are doing dance training with elderly, which are showing some really nice effects as well, because that's another way that you can really, train your balance and challenge your balance in
Yeah,
ways
and it's
that.
Dynamic, right?
Absolutely, yeah,
Yeah.
and that's when you fall, is when you're typically in a dynamic situation. So what we know is like specificity of training is what works best. So if you can come up with some kind of combine training with potentially some dance training, some strength training, some perturbation training. And unfortunately, not everyone has these kind of treadmills just hanging around. They're quite expensive.
But treadmills are coming down in price. I noticed. I get, in my feeds every once in a while, I'll see an advert for a much more affordable treadmill than I could have purchased, 10 years ago.
I'm not sure
So
if they could do these kind of fast perturbations that
no,
you
I
would need
think
for
they might
this.
need an extra
Yeah, uh,
certification to
yeah,
sell
yeah.
those ones.
But yeah, I think these combined training. I think that's where it's at. Obviously, walking on a treadmill is a lot different than walking over ground, and so there are other labs around the world that have tried to set up similar protocols during overground walking. So all of a sudden they, step on something that's very slippery with very little friction, and they don't know when that's coming, or all of a sudden on a walkway something will pop up and to trip them up, kind of thing. But it's those are also difficult things to bring out into the clinic or into training centers and stuff like that. But
How is funding for this particular area of research? Because I could imagine that it can be hard to really make it like a super sexy grant application in terms of like fall prevention. Or do you think that the foundations and the organizations that distribute money actually recognize it as a major point of care, a major need? Um,
yeah, I think that's changed in the last 10, 15 years. I think this idea of healthy aging and prevention of disease and prevention of um, y- things going wrong during aging, and really having a focus on healthy aging is something that's more and more popular. both in research and in funding. I mean, there are some foundations that are specifically wanting to look at that kind of thing. Not saying that it's necessarily easy to get money. It never is, but I think it's certainly something that warrants research.
Yeah. It's just, yeah, there's just so much competition for grants, and so you really need to find ways to, yeah, get noticed and, break through the noise, and also like what you can promise in terms of results. And
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, but I think that a lot of foundations have recognized that we are getting older as a population. It means that there are going to be more and more people that potentially need care, and if we can, look at more preventative methods or alternative methods to, train people at home or train people in groups, like what dance type interventions can do, then we can lower the cost and um, the burden on the healthcare system. So I think that is being recognized, at least in a lot of the Danish foundations.
right. So like for your like future research, I know you work with BCI, so brain computer interfaces, and you're focusing on stroke rehab. And then you're also, of course, working in fall and fall prevention. Is there any other area of research that you would say, I would love to like dive into that? Like, do you see a natural extension? I'm not saying that you don't have enough to do, because I'm sure you have plenty.
It's
But
usually the problem, yeah.
if you were to just say, okay, if I was to like start over, or if I was to take what I'm doing now, is there any sort of combination of the two that you would say this would be so cool to work on?
I mean, I'm super interested in any, like, rehabilitation technology type stuff. Yeah, we've recently established a center for neurotechnology and rehabilitation here in northern Denmark, which is a collaboration between the acute hospital for where stroke patients come in, us out of the university, and the rehabilitation hospital as well, where you would go for rehab after a stroke. And this is a collaboration that's been kind of existing for around 20 years, but more formalizing that. Those collaborations and trying to push the research in the area has been really great. And I think that the technology and stuff that's being developed now is really fascinating. And there we talk about our really amazing treadmill that can do these things, but there are treadmills that combine this split belt type scenario with full motion capture. There are some systems that put these kind of treadmills on a platform that can tilt and rotate, so you can challenge balance in that way. And then there are add-ons to these systems where you basically are in a dome type situation with a big screen that is completely immersive. So you can put them in like augmented reality, virtual reality type situations. The
That
systems are,
sounds like a really cool video game.
yeah. So I was very lucky to go down to the company that builds this last year, and yeah, had a demo of how this works. We have in Brønderslev, we have, and Frederikshavn, as part of the rehab unit, we were fortunately able to purchase a system that has not like a dome type screen, but a really big screen in front of a treadmill, that we use for rehabilitation purposes, and you can see obstacles appearing on a screen that you have to step over, or you have to, so it's really trying to challenge the balance system, dynamic, static balance, pushing, this walking rehabilitation, which is, what's really needed is to challenge and push yourself in a safe environment. Because if you want to get these people back into the world, like, there are not many more challenging things than walking down the street with different surface textures and things like that, walking past different people, and walking down the street in a big city like Copenhagen, or bigger even than New York is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the goal is that, you can still go out and get your groceries.
Yeah, yeah. You want to get back to your everyday function in life, right? You want to be independent of help. You want to be able to, have autonomy over what you do in your life, and you want to be able to help yourself. And that's what's lost in a lot of these patients. So yeah, any of these kind of technological type advances to improve rehab. It could be stroke, but it could be lots of other neurological conditions. That's where I see a big passion of mine going forward.
Okay. So if we were to like reel it back a little bit and say, okay, well, this is such an important area of research. Um, I'm guessing that most people don't walk around and think, oh, I got to go do some balance training so that when I'm 70, I don't fall and I can still go get groceries, right? They like people, we don't think that way. So, have you considered like, how is it that we have to change our mindset? Have you looked at any other like forms of scientific dissemination to get more people aware about, some of these basic things that they need to prevent? Have you considered that as also part of your forte, or do you want to like join me next year on another podcast so we can remind people that they need to learn how to fall?
Yeah, good question. I think, of course, it's not something that you think about every day, and it's probably not something you should think about every day. Like, you shouldn't be thinking, necessarily 50 years in the future, and what you do today can affect, how you may fall you know, in many, many years' time. But, I still think that is something that could improve in the future in terms of awareness. Really, like screenings could be potentially important. I think that if we really want to be moving towards like preventative care and the focus on health, then I think campaigns in terms of um, what we can be doing to help ourselves in the future, and they are important. But how exactly to do that? I don't think that's quite my area. There are people that have dedicated their careers to these kind of questions, and
Yes, research careers for sure. Um, let's look at your research career so far. So you're still considered a young researcher, I would say, and you're obviously very accomplished. But for anyone that is considering a research career now, we can both probably agree that if you start a research career now, it was definitely different than when you and I started our research careers. But even despite that, um, are you would you be willing to share some of the pros and cons of your experience of being a researcher, and like, please don't sugarcoat it, because I think a lot of people would love to hear like what are the pros and cons you think of like pursuing an academic career.
yeah. It's a great question. Yeah, I love what I do. I think I have such an amazing job. Um, I think that you know being able to go to work each day and try and solve problems that have never been addressed before, and try and answer questions that we don't know the answer to yet, and things like that. I think that's a pretty big privilege, especially because we have, you know, within reason, you know, kind of a lot of free reign to actually go out and try and answer questions that we find interesting. And I think that's also really important in terms of research. Like, I don't think you should go into a PhD just to do a PhD. I don't, if you don't have, you know, questions that you want to answer and that you're really passionate about, like, going through an academic education and doing a PhD is really tough. There are lots of roadblocks. Um, there are always things that go wrong in experiments, and they can be from little things to bigger things. And yeah, I think that if you're not passionate, then you're not going to get through that.
Okay.
But yeah, I think some of the hardest things, I think, yeah, part of that would be, applying for funding and getting rejections and things like that, because obviously research costs money, and yeah, we need to fund a lot of that through grant applications and things like that too. So that's one thing that's never easy.
Yeah, the rejection, because I don't think people really realize like how often scientists get rejected. Like, it's worse than dating. Like it's like, could you imagine if you asked out someone every month or every 6 months and they just kept saying no, no, no all the time? Like you would start to feel kind of pretty bad about yourself. And
Well, especially because it's your ideas, and you take it
yeah,
quite personally,
yeah,
right? Like you think, oh, this is an amazing idea, and
yeah.
I think sometimes sometimes it's just hard to get like the right message across. Um, yeah, but yeah, I mean, there are some grounding sources that have like a 5% exception rate. I mean, it's
And 5% is like, well, we know what 5% is, but also the number of applications. So like we're not talking about 100 people applying and 5 people get. We're talking about like hundreds and like 200,000 or like 500,000 or like I don't know what the latest statistics are for some of the Danish numbers, but I could imagine in the US they're quite substantial. In the UK, where they have a lot of applications and a lot of like internal competitions. Denmark has like, what are we at, like 7 or 8 universities, colleges. Colleges were a lot more colleges, but
yeah.
but yeah, university wise, yeah. So that's a lot of people applying for funding.
Yeah, and I think there is an advantage in the Danish society that like research is prioritized. Like it's something that there are foundations out there that are really interested in promoting research, and they want it to succeed, and they want Denmark to be a leading country, especially within neuroscience, which is pretty amazing. So there are a lot of amazing neuroscientists in Denmark, which is great. Obviously, it makes the competition greater as well if you're trying to compete with some of these people for.
Is Denmark recognized for like its neuroscience research?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's hard, sitting within Denmark and trying to answer that question, I
It's,
guess. But
yeah, it's like
I mean, the Lundbeck Foundation has like the biggest neuroscience prize in the world, the Brain Prize. They give that out every year, and so I think that yeah, there are, especially in certain areas, there are a lot of really internationally recognized neuroscientists here in Denmark.
right. Yeah, so it's not only about wind, like because Denmark is definitely on the map for
Yes.
wind power and renewable energy solutions. Yeah,
Yeah, I've
so
been lucky enough to join an investigator network for younger scientists and neuroscientists in Denmark, which is also supported by the Lundbeck Foundation. So that's only one foundation that has, really, yeah. Also, they're the ones that give out this brain prize. I think, that's a foundation that supports a lot of neuroscience network and neuroscience research.
right, and they
Yeah.
love it when you just send like crazy ideas forward. I suppose. I mean, they actually don't they have like specific calls that are
So one thing with applying for research funding is that like often it can depend on your CV. Like if there are people applying that have a better career or a better CV or more publications or whatever, then that can be hard for younger scientists to kind of get in the door. But they do have a specific call for great ideas. So the CV is basically irrelevant. They're looking only at the idea, and it's a completely anonymous application process, which is pretty cool. So then, it really becomes how good is the question,
right.
and how good is the methodology to try and answer
Yeah,
that
is it
question. I think
feasible?
that's awesome. And there are journals and things like that are kind of moving in that direction as well, because I think one of the challenges in research is that sometimes findings are not significant, but the question is still good, and worth answering, and the methodology is sound and stuff like that. But those kind of findings can sometimes be quite hard to publish. So there are journals appearing where you submit your protocol, and regardless of the results, if they accept that protocol and what you're doing, then they'll publish results regardless of whether they're positive or negative. And I think that's a really good thing for.
Right, because they basically have signed off on the methodology in advance. So then, okay, then you're like forced to look at the results of that approved method, approved approach. I think that's really, yeah, that is definitely a step forward because I've also learned recently that sometimes we get really slowed down because we don't know what doesn't work.
Mm,
And it's like,
Yeah,
that's
because
like,
those findings are not available, right?
yeah,
Like,
and or nobody talks about them, or
yeah.
you feel like internally like a failure as a scientist, that, oh, you didn't find any significant findings. And when that sort of structure is set up, that it also incentivizes really poor decision making about, well, how much can I like comb through this data set to find something worthy of reporting, instead of just saying at face value, like, okay, that was the question, that's what the study was designed to answer, that's the data set. I'm not saying ignore, like, if you have a huge data set, there's nothing wrong with using it to generate new hypotheses or explore it further, because when you have that, magnitude of data, then you should be able to ask new questions. I mean, that's the whole premise behind a biobank, right? You collect a lot of data in advance, hoping that the right questions will be asked in the future.
Yeah, and I think that's actually an area that we're very fortunate in Denmark, and in terms of like the publicly available data on patient groups and things in Denmark, because so many things are really centralized. And
Mm.
in northern Denmark here, we're looking at stroke rehabilitation. Like, everyone goes through the same hospital if they come in with a stroke, and so you can follow these patients and see what's working and what's not working.
Right. But
Uh,
that's also because Denmark is not as big as the US, obviously. So like, at least you have, like, in this case, our geography works for us. So you're able to get that systematic approach.
yeah.
Cool. So what are then, like, like, going back to the PhD student or someone that's considering an academic career, what is it that you think that most people don't know about being in academia, other than the fact that we get rejected a lot?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I don't know. I think one big part of it as well of being in academia is the teaching side, which fortunately I really enjoy. I think there are probably some people in academia that enjoy that less. But it's a hugely important part of what we do, is trying to disseminate our knowledge. Like, the teaching that we do at the university is supposed to be research based teaching. So then you're not really going to find people that are in academia that are just teaching, or maybe in some institutions that don't have educations. Then you will find more people that are doing just research. But I think it's really important to combine the two, and yeah, teaching is something that, yeah, like I said, I really enjoy.
Do you see differences since, like, when you started? Of course, you changed also from when you started to where you are now, in terms of like the engagement from the student side. So, I mean, like, I know you do a lot of teaching in sports science. Where you also, what else are you teaching in
Medicine,
medicine? Yeah.
things to do with the nervous system. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, but like, a sports science student would be a classic student, a medical student would be a classical student. How have you, how has that experience changed over the course of the years, in terms of your impression of what students expect from you, their engagement?
Yeah, I think that one thing that was really interesting to me was when I came to Denmark, because I had been doing a little bit of teaching before I left New Zealand, and then when I was in Canada as well. Like, the differences in culture of students, and the differences in actually the whole academic setup. Where in Aalborg here we have this problem-based learning. Philosophy, which involves a lot of group work, and really focusing on solving problems. Whereas I was, at least in New Zealand, it was really lecture based. And we did a lot of laboratory work and things like that as well. But just the setup of the structure is really geared towards like working together with people, and I really like that here, because when you're trying to educate people to eventually go out and get a job in society, then you can't do anything in a vacuum. And you're always having to work with people, and work with people that are different from yourself, and training that through the education, I think, is really great. and I think that's also a really important point in terms of doing research as well. Is like you never are doing research in a vacuum. Like, it's really rare that you're going to go and publish a paper that you're the only author on, because um, you're always doing things in collaboration with others, and that's something that I also really like about being a researcher. Um,
Okay,
it,
so
yeah.
like you see a lot of positive collaboration in like the teaching setup that you are exposed to now,
Yeah, I think both teaching and research.
and the
Yeah,
research. Yeah.
and I think sorry, going back to your question earlier about how students maybe have changed. I think
Or their
that,
expectations of you, maybe.
yeah, I think it really depends on the education. It depends on the type of student. But yeah, I think that there's so much information available online these days that um, of course, you can question the credibility of a lot of the information, and now there are all of these artificial intelligence and large language models and things like that. I think that some of that may change the way, or it is changing the way that we maybe need to think about teaching, um, and our students are doing a lot of report writing and things like that as well, and I think that could potentially change that. But it's also changing it for us as researchers, right? Like, our access to information these days is infinitely more vast than what it was even 10 years ago. um, and that is both an advantage and a disadvantage, right? Because there's just so much more research out there. There's so many different things to read all the time. Trying to keep up on top of the state of the art of the field can be a big challenge, with the amount of information that's out there. So
Yeah, 100%. And I
yeah,
think maybe the students also feel that because as you guys are doing a lot of project based learning, a lot of that involves research and, coming up with new ideas as part of those projects. When the students are going into the literature, because that is part of what they're supposed to learn how to do, they're like they just get a tidal wave of information, and then to know how to sort through that information, oh man.
yeah, and I think that's a really good point, and that's something that we need to adapt to in many ways. Is like how to teach how to sort through that information, and what is a good resource, and why can you not just use ChatGTP to write your report for you, because you don't know exactly where the information is coming from, and it's not citable or not necessarily verifiable in the same way. And yeah, so I think those are all things that are going to be big challenges in the near future, at least.
And what do you think will happen in terms of like research and its structure, like with this tidal wave of information that's coming out? What do you think will happen in terms of like discoverability? So if we go back and look at the research that you guys are producing, you ultimately want that to be discovered by the right person, right? And it's often not the journal that is going to, it can be facilitative, let's just say. um, but most research is not published in the most prestigious journals. So if we just say, okay, there's a few prestigious journals and then everything else is just equal to one, um, like what do you see as, like how are we going to combat that? Like how do you make sure that your research gets found, it gets used, it's makes it out there?
Yeah, I mean, it's in many ways is kind of similar to writing grant applications. Like, you've got to use the right language and the right terminology, and there are specific AI models to get towards research now, where they actually can almost or write a full review of the literature in a specific field for you and cite it and everything. So and you can look at the way different things are being published and connections and things like that. But I think one way to really get out there is actually talking to people in real life as well. um, yeah, participating in conferences and participating in different networks, and potentially applying for joint grants across borders. And, we have different examples of that in Europe for funding from the European Union. And I think that networking is still going to be a big part of science in the future,
Like a
like
much
actual
like a
face
more
to
needed
face.
part. So
Yeah, yeah,
because we do that now, but if we look at the tidal wave of information that's coming out, and then now we're saying, okay, well, how do we make sure our research gets found by the right person? So at some point, the researcher or the team, the network behind that study, they need to say, okay, we need to start to funnel that information towards the right people, because I think, and this is looking back at my own research career, like we're often just so happy to finally get published that by the time that happens, you're so preoccupied with the next project or the next grant application. So it really kind of is like the train stops. And the journals nowadays, they also, like, it stops for them too. Like, it's published now, so their job is done. So there's like no one that is like picking up that research and really like extending it. So yeah, I do see that somebody has to do it. Like somebody, some entity
yep.
needs to continue that journey.
Yeah, well, and I think it is the case that sometimes things take a long time to publish, and you're right. Like once that's published, you're already on to the next thing,
Yeah,
and I think that's again where presentations at conferences, or you know being a part of a PhD assessment committee, and going to other places and seeing what other people are doing and learning different techniques from other people, where that's where you can both see what other people are doing, but also push what you're doing yourself, and get inspiration for new ideas and new collaborations and things like that. So I firmly believe that the network part of it is very, very important.
so you think the network will be even more important in the future?
Yeah, I think so. I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because if you have a strong network, then you can also hear from them about what are they reading, and what are they looking into, and what are the directions they're taking things. And
Yeah, I would really like to see us go back to like old fashioned ways of communicating science, where like you and I only got to like watch them in like movies that were backdated like 100 years ago, and like where you would go and you would actually talk at a conference, and you would show your research and you would show it there, not because you were like saying, look at what I did. It was more like, can you help me answer this question? Or I have this and this is what I found and this is why I think. What do you guys think? And like really bounce it off in a true collaborative manner. Most of the conferences that I went to, I mean, few people often go up to the podium like to ask a speaker a question at the end. And because of that, what I have seen now, as a result of few people doing that for whatever reason, it could be both a presenter, it could also be the audience, that then they just start to remove the Q&A time from the conferences. So you just have like back to back conference. You're just like being hammered with information.
yep.
Surely people must have questions.
Yeah, it doesn't give you a chance to process that information, right? Like,
No.
yeah. Well, and I I've always been advised from some really, really clever people when I've been going through my education that, often research, like if you ask a good question, then you're not necessarily going to get all the answers. You're going to get more questions. And that's basically what research is building on question upon question, and trying to come to some kind of consensus about what the answers, or what the best answers may be. But good research is always going to leave you with more questions, and that's I think a challenge of being in academia as well, is there's never time to answer them all.
No.
So it's a matter of prioritization, and trying to figure out what are the most important questions to be asking. And um, how, yeah, you're right. How can other people help you with different insights in answering these questions, or what do you think? And
Yeah, like a truly collaborative, open-minded, like, this is what I got. What do you guys think? And and of course, the audience needs time to process it and give their like initial feedback. They've only looked at it for like 5 minutes. You've been looking at it for 2 years. So there's that.
Yeah, yeah. So some of my favorite activities are conferences in person, or
Yeah.
going to a PhD defense and discussing with people about their research, and trying to figure out, okay, what does this actually mean? What can we use
Mm.
this for, and what's the applications, and what does it mean for these kind of individuals, and things like that. So
If we bring back motor imagery into this part of our conversation, then it's almost like we need more thought experiments done by people that have a good understanding of the literature, like where we really run through those experiments in our mind. We draw on that knowledge, we exercise that, we put it out there, and we say, what do we predict would be the explanation in a case like this, or what. And I wonder if there is a place in science for that now, because right now everybody's so keen on making sure that they got publication and that publication has a DOI number. But I do feel like we don't run through the mental exercises like they used to, like where you would sit around in a room and you would like really like deliberate like how the universe worked, and yeah, and then you would get like the big idea. I think that could be a lot of fun. I don't know if that could be something that would like unfold on a proper podcast. Like if we had two other people here that were like really good at motor imagery, and then we really dissected like some thought experiments on what would happen in this particular case. It would almost be like Jeopardy for
yeah,
science.
that would be pretty cool. I would enjoy that. And like panel discussions about one specific topic or whatever, right? Like, you kind of, in your everyday life, oftentimes you can really get stuck in the weeds, right? Like, oh, the nitty gritty of this particular study or a particular technique or something. And sometimes it's also important to like get your head out of the ground and take a breath and take a step back and see what the bigger picture of these findings and implications mean across a broader perspective. I think that's also really important to keep in mind.
Absolutely. I think the bigger picture, yeah, we do get, sucked down these rabbit holes. I don't know if that's the best expression for it, but you do get sucked down, and I think, yeah, we do need to pull back because there are like so many other big problems that are facing our societies today. And you got to wonder, like, is this like small change in a parameter of the study that I've already ran like 3 times? Is that really gonna, is like, I think even scientists need to value their time more. Like I really believe that. I think they underestimate like how smart they are. They underestimate like how much change they can bring out. And I see it more now that I'm like a step outside of academia. I don't know if it's just easier to say because I'm not in academia, but I really do see like there's just so many skills, and so like people are so underutilized and their talents are underutilized. Um, I would really like to see more of like the bigger picture projects, and that probably does require that networking.
Yeah. And I think it also requires people like you, right? Like, who have that experience in academia and then actually taking that step back and looking at things more broadly. And I think, that's a huge value to the scientific community that you can help provide. So,
Well, we'll see how this goes, and I'm quite keen on trying like the whole like let's get some old fashioned like chairs. Maybe we'll even wear like a plaid jacket, and I think I know some perfect people that would totally love to wear a plaid jacket to a panel discussion. I think we both know who I'm speaking of, and yeah, really like try and do these thought experiments. It would be super great to explore that as a possibility down the road. I would love to explore that with you and a few others. We could try with motor imagery or stroke rehab or even the BCI stuff. I think because there's just so much philosophical debate about that,
yeah.
and how it will work and why will it work and why it won't work. And
Yeah. Who will it work for? And yeah, there are lots of questions that are worth debating, I think.
Yeah, there should be more debate and more people with like stronger opinions. I recognize that also as I move further away from like the academic circle, that we are so safeguarded in our opinions,
Mm,
and I understand that now. Like I get it, but I also feel like sometimes people just need we need to have more conviction. We need to take a stance, and I really hope that like scientists will start to realize that, yeah, that they need to take the stance too, and I think some of it comes actually from being more humble rather than less, like less humble when you take a stance, because you have to remember that you're just one person and you're not that important. And I don't mean that to you personally, but I think we get wrapped up into this world where we think, well, whatever I say is so important, so I have to be careful what I say. And yeah, I'm just curious to hear what you think about that. Like, do you think scientists should be more opinionated? Do you think it would do the world good?
well, again, I think that that no
This is
one
your
is
moment to be opinionated.
no one is working in a vacuum, right? Like
No.
and I think that's something that really should be recognized, is that even the people with the biggest list of publications in science and stuff, like they've all been working with other people, and I couldn't have done any of what I'm doing without the amazing people that I've had around me, right? So um, yeah, I was thinking about these kind of panel debates and stuff, and I think with the developments of technology and things that we have today, um, it's going to throw up all sorts of ethical questions as well, right? Like, if you're using technology to read our brain waves and things like that, like who owns that data? And we've got Elon Musk with Neuralink implanting devices within brains, and where's the um, you know where's the line between human and machine going to be in the future? And what kind of things can we control with our mind, and or vice versa, right? Like, can our brain be controlled by something else if you've got something implanted in there, and things like that? And I think those are really fascinating discussions to have too.
Definitely science topics of science fiction that may no longer be science fiction at some point. And so you're saying that potential debates or like the imaginary experiments should actually be carried out by scientists that have, some understanding of how the body and the brain works, also some understanding of the technology, those things should be like where we could start
Yeah,
essentially.
yeah. Not even just scientists. I mean, also potential patient groups, and
Yeah, industry
um,
experts. Yeah.
family members, and yeah, people that can actually, manufacturers, and like everyone should be involved in these kind of discussions. Clinicians and therapists, and
Yeah. And that's where we can like stand with our convictions, I suppose, if that's where we're going to take them.
right, exactly, because your convictions are only as good as the people around you, I think, and in a bigger
That's true.
pool of information, because you can also ask these really amazing questions you think are really fascinating, but if there are therapists and patients that are like, I would never use something like that, why, what's the point? So that's why it's also really important not to be in a vacuum, and have networks of people around you.
Yeah.
Interdisciplinary research, and involvement of patients, involvement of other groups is super important.
Great. All right. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for joining me on Bonded by Science. It's been a real pleasure to get your insight about the research, and also to see where, if you had more funding, how you would build up your lab. And I do look forward to like following the research, especially about how we can better prepare ourselves, for when we age, and hopefully more people will learn how to fall.
Thanks. Yeah, it was always amazing to chat, and thanks for asking lots of awesome questions.
Well, it was easy because I mean it was so much great research to pull on. So thank you so much, Andrew. Really a pleasure.